Another day, another recap. Today's special will be about a movie titled Infiltrator. In this, our main man, Walter White, is on the other side of the law.
I am not in danger, Skyler. I am the danger.
Instead of making, he is breaking, and without further ado, enjoy the recap. The movie opens informing us that the cartel in the 80s smuggled 15 tons of coke a week, the equivalent of $400 million. Most of this being done in Florida. This true story then begins in 1985 Tampa, Florida, where our main character Robert Mazur sits at a bowling alley. He is quickly joined by his friend, who when he sits down pushes a bag underneath the seat. Robert tells him that he can handle more, and the man responds saying he can give him 10 more kilos. They begin to walk and Robert feels a pain in his chest and drops to the floor, but with the help of the man they leave. As soon as they are outside, a swarm of police arrests the both of them and place them in separate vans. Once Robert is inside, his shirt is lifted, which reveals he was wearing a wire that malfunctioned and burned his chest. In the next scene, Robert arrives home in the night and checks on his family. He joins his wife Evelyn in the living room and informs her that the bust went okay, and takes out his undercover identification to burn the evidence of his other life. Next, we see Robert with his Aunt Vicky, asking him if he was able to get any money off the undercover operation. Robert laughs at this, and the following morning Robert is in the briefing for work. His boss Bonnie informs the agents that the teams are changing. She pairs Robert with another agent named Abreu, then begins explaining their next assignment. She switches on the projector and apprises the agents of the innumerable cartel-related deaths littering the streets. Bob also discovers he is entitled to early retirement with full benefits. In the house, Robert is spending time with his wife and kids when his new uninvited partner Abreu shows up. He opens the door and asks for Robert. They both go outside and begin to speak. Robert tells Abreu that he can't just show up uninvited. He dismisses this and begins to tell Robert of a snitch named Gonzalo who is willing to give some big information for $250,000. Robert thinks this is a foolish idea, not trusting this supposed informant, and tells his partner to leave. Next, we see Gonzalo excitingly getting in the car with Abreu. He begins to tell him that these people are on the top. Simultaneously, we see Robert running with Steve. Robert says that instead of following the drugs, they need to follow the money to get to the criminals at the top. Following this, Robert and Abreu are at a cemetery together. Robert tells him to focus and starts looking for something. They begin to write down names to which they will assume these identities. After, Robert introduces Abreu to a friend of his, Eric Wellman. Eric gives them a base of operations as well as several other resources for their operation. After this, we see Gonzalez cutting a deal with two gangsters, Mora Sr. and Mora Jr. He tells them that he knows two people who can wash their money, trying to set them up with Robert and Abreu. They agree. In a parent-teacher conference, Robert receives an important phone call. Robert is listening in on a conversation between Abreu, Gonzalez, and the two Moras. Abreu is able to convince them to let him wash their money. They give him a small amount and assure them there is more where that came from. However, he wants to meet the boss soon. Seeing them leave, Robert enters the staged house. As he is walking around, Abreu and the now drunken men walk back in, forcing Robert into the closet. He waits for the man to sleep, then sneaks out the room, accidentally awakening Gonzalez, who pulls a gun out but then stops. Mora Sr., who was also awoken, is told that everything is fine. In the next scene, we see Robert angrily arrive at Abreu's house. He berates him for both leaving him inside the closet and that their informant pulled a gun on him. Abreu tells Robert that he can trust him and will have his back. Robert then meets with a prisoner named Dom. They seem to be friends. Robert tells him that he needs his help for this operation. Dom tells him he can help, however, he makes it clear he won't rat. Robert then sets up the release of the man who will go undercover with him. Following this, Robert sets up a real estate plan that will invest the cartel's money in Florida houses. These investors are more than willing to help Robert, and the business begins an exponential growth into the money laundering market. Robert later on arrives at a meeting with the two Moras and Abreu. They discuss the logistics of the plan and how the money will be laundered. They agree with Robert and say they need the okay from their bosses. Robert also, being in a tight position, says he's engaged to a woman. Abreu later berates him, saying it was foolish of him to make up such a story. Abreu leaves, and as Robert gets in his car, he realizes he is being watched. In the next scene, Robert meets with a man named Ospina. Ospina is in charge of the money laundering for Pablo Escobar. Robert then takes the entire crew to his supposed mansion in Jersey, where he discusses with Ospina how they will use the Panamanian banks in order to launder the money. The man is pleased with this as his people trust the Panamanian banks. During this meeting, Mora Sr. begins to lose consciousness. The others help him to his room, and he is fine. After Ospina and Robert get into a mild confrontation, Robert ends it quickly and retreats to his room. Later, he complains to the Moras about Ospina and this confrontation. Mora Jr. assures him that this is part of doing business with the man, and as they are conversing, Ospina comes from behind them. This puts everybody on edge, however. Ospina tells Robert that there won't be any more problems unless he endangers the boss's money. The following morning, Bonnie addresses the agency, briefing them on Robert and Abreu's plan. Their main targets are Pablo Escobar, Don Chepe, their financier Rudy Armbrecht, and their main distributor Roberto Alcaino. She then speaks to Robert one-on-one, and since he told the Moras he had a fiancée, she has an undercover woman named Kathy who can fit that description, but despite his protest, she tells him it's not up for negotiation. In the next scene, Robert receives a phone call from an executive named Akbar at the BCCI Panamanian Bank. He tells Robert that his accounts are extremely active and there is a problem with 2 checks that they received. He is also completely aware of the nature of these accounts and tells Robert that he will personally handle his account. Robert, extremely pleased with this, asks him if he can meet with executives within America. Akbar says this is no problem and sets up a meeting. Soon enough, the meeting takes place and another man named A1 also attends. During this, Robert flat out tells the men that he is laundering money for businessmen who are massive distributors. The men excuse themselves for a moment and return with their European executive Ian Howard and 2 guards. Ian assures Robert that he came to the right bank and begins to discuss various methods to help Robert deal with his client's cash. Later, Robert is going for a run when he realizes he is being followed by a car. The car pulls up next to him, then after a bit leaves. Robert immediately tells his partners and Abreu says he'll handle it and gets the plate numbers from him. Robert and Kathy then work together to solidify their undercover identities. Later, Robert returns home and finds out he had forgotten that today was his anniversary. He takes his wife to dinner, but without a reservation was put into the back of the restaurant. Evelyn begins to tell him that he's changed and is starting to look different, but is interrupted when Mora Sr. notices and talks to Robert. Robert asks him to join and he does. He introduces his wife as his secretary, and then the waiter arrives with a happy anniversary cake. Robert confronts the waiter, telling him he ordered a birthday cake, but when the waiter disagrees, Robert dunks his head in it in an effort to maintain his cover. Evelyn tells Robert that she has never seen him like that, and he is regretful she had to see that. Next we find that Abreu has located the man who was following Robert, a government agent in fact. Abreu jumps him inside a bathroom, then begins to beat him, questioning him as to who he works for. Before we can get an answer, the man pulls a gun and fires, causing Abreu to retreat. Robert meanwhile meets with Steve, who tells him that the man is a CIA agent. Robert hands him the tapes and tells them the cartel has bought in. Later on, Robert meets with a cartel associate named Seal. Seal has a ring of a golden cocoa leaf that Robert takes notice to. They get in the car and start to discuss business. Out of nowhere, a motorcycle approaches and opens fire, hitting Seal multiple times, which causes the car to flip over and crash into a pole. Drenched in blood and seeing Seal dead, Robert leaves the scene in panic. In a phone call later that night, Dom tells him he cannot mention this in his meeting later, and must act like it never happened. In the meeting, Robert tells both Mora Sr. and Ospina that either they set a meeting with their bosses or he will end their business arrangement. Ospina agrees to this and tells him they have reached a point of no return. Robert is blindfolded and taken to an unknown location. He is escorted to Rudy, the top financier. Rudy tells Robert to proceed into the next room. He is kneeled down next to another man sitting in front of a priest. The priest kills the man out of nowhere, then asks Robert for his name, and after another ritual says he is free to meet with Rudy. Rudy tells him that this was an audition and he got the part. Robert then offers a handshake but is refused. He is then set to meet Alcaino, the top distributor, which he does, both him, Kathy, and Vicky. Alcaino is very charmed by Vicky and Kathy, who play their parts as Robert's family perfectly. Alcaino invites the couple for dinner with him and his wife tonight, and they accept. Later during dinner, they become closer and begin to gain the trust of the Alcaino. Alcaino tells Robert that in this business trust is absolutely needed, and without it, things will always end badly. That night, Robert tells Kathy that they need to be extremely careful, as one slip-up would cost them their lives. The next day at the Alcainos, Robert watches a news report talk about Barry Seal and how he was a government informant about to testify in court on the cartel. Alcaino tells him how Seal was his friend, how he sat at his family's dinner table and prayed with them. He was also the one to give him the ring, a trust that was clearly misplaced. In the next scene, Gonzalo is complaining to Abreu that he's risking his life for money that isn't worth it. Abreu tells him he can't do any better and this is the deal. Gonzalo doesn't accept this and says he will rat to the cartel. Abreu threatens him with force and tells him to shut up and follow his lead. They enter a house with Mora Jr. and his cousin, but they sense something is off. Gonzalo then accuses Abreu of being a cop, causing an altercation. But this is interrupted when Mora Jr. draws a gun. Abreu accuses Gonzalo of stealing from them and asks Mora to pull his pants down and see the stolen money. They find it and begin to laugh when suddenly Mora's cousin shoots Gonzalo in the head. They then maniacally laugh over the dead body. Abreu tries to get in contact with Robert, however he is preoccupied by the Alcainos. They show him and Kathy great hospitality. Later, Alcaino says that he will introduce Robert to Pablo Escobar. However, before he does, he needs Robert to unfreeze $10 million of Pablo's money. Robert tries to get the agency to unfreeze the assets, but they simply tell him it can't be done. They get worried when Abreu says things could get dangerous if the money doesn't come through. Next, Robert retrieves several packages from his base of operation and takes them home. While listening to some recordings, Robert's daughter notices the package is dripping and brings it to him. This panics both Robert and his wife. He puts his family in the other room and opens the package. He discovers a small bloody coffin, the calling card of Pablo Escobar. Later, Dom tells Robert how much danger he and his family could get into if he doesn't stop this now, and in an effort to keep his family safe, Robert leaves his home and stays in his laundering base. In the next scene, Robert tells Alcaino how he was sent Pablo's calling card and how he cannot do business under threat. Alcaino says that neither of them is in a position to dictate terms to Pablo and the best thing would be to get his money. Robert meets with A1 and Akbar. He flat out asks them both to falsify records so that Pablo's money can get out. They agree, but only if Robert increases his deposits. He also agrees and shakes A1's hand. But before he leaves, Akbar asks to see Robert's briefcase. Admiring its craftsmanship, Robert is taken aback as behind the leather is a listening device. He shows Akbar, who compliments it. Following this, the duo attends a meeting with a BCCI banker named Chinoy. Kathy says that they have a wedding date plan, and Robert later tells her this was a good idea as they can make all their arrests on that day. Another meeting is also held. This one is with Rudy, Chinoy, Ospina and Robert. However, Ospina arrives intoxicated and begins to disrespect Chinoy. As Robert listens in, the leather strap of his suitcase falls, revealing his listening device. Ospina notices this and draws the suitcase on a napkin. As Robert tries to retrieve Kathy, Ospina grabs his face and tells him he knows who he is. Suddenly, Ospina is shot dead, and both Rudy and Mora Jr. laugh as they do not tolerate disrespect. In the morning, Robert invites the Moras and Rudy to his wedding. As they are speaking, Don Chepe and another man walks past them, and Don Chepe is invited to Robert's wedding and Chepe says he will make it if he can. Rudy tells Robert that they are releasing $150 million to him, then shakes his hand and leaves. Robert later reveals to Kathy that the man who walked past them was Pablo Escobar himself. Following this, Bonnie informs Robert that they received a tip. 2,500 pounds of coke was shipped into the port, and she wants to bust it. Robert pleads with her, saying this will wreck the entire undercover operation. Despite Robert's protest, they continue, and a shootout ensues. Alcaino, who is in the port, currently runs for it and manages to escape, leaving the gunfight. After Robert and Kathy visit Alcaino's wife, who is in a state of panic, she tells Robert that he needs to keep the operation alive while he is underground. Robert tells her that she needs to flee back to her country now to evade arrest. She tells him she needs to stay and leaves the room. Both Kathy and Robert feel confused. They clearly care about the Alcainos and have become very close friends. On the day of the wedding, a sting is set. Everyone from the agency is present and undercover as either guests or waiters. Abreu is the best man and even the media is there staged as wedding photographers. The Moras make an attendance, and even the personnel from BCCI are there. They are all very excited for Robert. Bonnie informs Robert that Rudy did not attend. Before the ceremony commences, Alcaino surprisingly shows up and hugs Robert. Alcaino tells him that he is his friend and would not miss this for the world. Robert is stunned and says there is a part of him that wishes he hadn't taken the risk to come, clearly feeling some empathy for him. As Robert walks up the aisle, he is met with all the faces of this new life, realizing this will all come to an end after today. The priest begins, and as he calls for any objections, the police arrive. A small shootout ensues and 2 cartel members are shot dead. The crowd is scattered and the police round them up for arrests. As they are subdued, Alcaino stares at Robert. Noticing he is not being arrested and realizes who he is, he does not say a word, but he looks gut-wrenched with betrayal. Robert stares back, clearly feeling some sorrow, and pleads with the police to take them away. After the wedding, Robert receives news that Rudy was taken at the airport. Abreu also tells him that not all his friends went to jail today, providing some comfort. The movie concludes with Robert approaching his wife and telling her that everything is over now. And as it turns out, over 100 bankers and traffickers were criminally charged. And the operation also led to the collapse of the 7th largest bank in the world. A1 and Akbar both received 12 years jail. Mora Jr. received 10 years while his father escaped back to Colombia. Rudy received 12 years and Alcaino received 15 years in prison. And Dom shortly after became a government witness. The end. Make sure to press that subscribe button and see you on the next one.